You are standing on the edge of the Nile Delta. To your north, the Mediterranean Sea. To your south, the sprawling, ancient river that has fed civilizations for thousands of years. It looks peaceful. The green fields of Dakahlya Governorate stretch out toward the horizon. But if you look closer, if you look at the data, you will see a silent crisis unfolding. It's not just about rising sea levels or scorching temperatures. It's about something much more intimate, something that is happening inside the bodies of the people living here, specifically the women. Now, you might be wondering, why focus on women? Doesn't climate change affect everyone? And that is exactly the question researchers are trying to answer with a groundbreaking new study. They are investigating a phenomenon that most of us have never even considered: the gendered biology of climate change. We often talk about polar bears and melting ice caps, but we rarely talk about what extreme heat does to female physiology, or how shifting disease patterns in the Nile Delta are rewriting the rules of women's health. This is the story of that trial. It's a story about the intersection of biology, geography, and survival, and it starts with a simple, unsettling realization: we have built our medical models on a world that no longer exists. But here's the part most people don't realize. The data coming out of places like Egypt isn't just about Egypt. It's a warning signal for the rest of the world. What is happening in Dakahlya today could be the reality for Southern Europe, the American South, and parts of Asia tomorrow. Hello, and welcome to Clinical Trials Explained. Let's dive in. To understand why this specific clinical trial is so important, we first have to understand where it's taking place. Dakahlya is located in the heart of the Nile Delta. This region is often called the breadbasket of Egypt. It is lush, it is fertile, and it is incredibly densely populated. But it is also one of the 3 most vulnerable points on Earth when it comes to climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has flagged the Nile Delta as a hotspot. The reasons are twofold. Rising sea levels are salinating the soil, making it harder to grow food, and rising temperatures are creating heat islands that the human body was never evolved to withstand. Now imagine living in this environment. You are surrounded by water, yet the heat is becoming unbearable.
And in this environment, researchers noticed a pattern. When a heat wave strikes, or when a new vector-borne disease outbreak occurs, men and women do not suffer equally. The mortality and morbidity rates often skew in unexpected ways. This brings us to the core of the study. The official title is Impact of Climate Changes on Women's Health in Dakahlya Governorate, Egypt. It sounds academic, perhaps a bit dry, but peel back the layers and you find a desperate race to understand a complex web of threats. The researchers, based at Mansoura University and Delta University for Science and Technology, are not testing a new pill. They aren't injecting a vaccine. Instead, they are conducting a massive, structured clinical investigation to map the health of women aged 18 to 60. They are looking for the invisible scars of climate stress. Think of it this way. In a traditional drug trial, you give a patient a medicine and wait to see if they get better. In this study, the drug is the environment, the changing climate, and the researchers are measuring the side effects, and the side effects are terrifyingly diverse. Why focus on women aged 18 to 60? This is the reproductive age range, the prime working age, the demographic that holds the fabric of society together. If this group begins to fail health-wise, the entire community structure is at risk. The researchers have set strict exclusion criteria. They are not looking at women who already have chronic conditions, like diabetes, kidney disease, or severe hypertension. They are also excluding pregnant women for this specific dataset. Why? Because they want to isolate the signal from the noise. They want to know, how does climate change affect a healthy woman? If they included people who were already sick, it would be hard to tell if their health declined because of the heat or because of their pre-existing condition. By focusing on the healthy, they are establishing a baseline. This is where things take an interesting turn. You might assume that the study is just asking people, do you feel hot? But it goes much deeper than that. They are looking at the intersection of infectious disease, mental health, and physical resilience. Let's talk about the mechanism of harm. How does climate change actually hurt a woman's body in Dakahlya? First, there's the heat itself. We know that women have different thermoregulatory mechanisms than men. Differences in body surface area, metabolic rate, and hormonal cycles can influence how the body handles extreme heat stress. In a region where temperatures are climbing, this biological difference becomes a survival factor. The researchers are assessing how these women are coping with the physical stress of a warming world. Are they experiencing more fainting spells, more cardiovascular strain? But then there is the vector-borne disease aspect. As the climate warms, mosquitoes and other disease-carrying insects are changing their behaviors. They are breeding in new places. They are biting for longer seasons. In the Delta, this is a critical concern. Women, who often manage the household water supply and spend significant time in domestic environments where these vectors breed, might be at higher exposure risks. The study is looking to quantify this. Are we seeing a spike in fevers, in unexplained infections, in fatigue that correlates with these shifting climate patterns? And here's the part that often gets ignored in medical discussions: the mental toll. The study explicitly lists mental illnesses as an exclusion criteria for pre-existing conditions, which suggests they are keenly interested in new-onset mental health issues triggered by environmental stress. This is a field called eco-anxiety, or climate-related distress. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing your land is becoming saltier, your water is becoming scarcer, and the heat is making it impossible to work or study. The researchers are using validated tools to measure the mental well-being of these women. They are asking, is climate change causing a hidden epidemic of depression and anxiety in the Nile Delta? Now, you might be asking yourself, how do they actually measure all of this? The trial design is observational and cross-sectional. This means they are taking a snapshot of the population at a specific moment in time. They are recruiting women from the university setting, students and staff. This is a strategic choice. University women are literate. They are often from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds within the region, and they are accessible for follow-up. The participants undergo a screening process. Remember those exclusion criteria? No chronic diseases, no pregnancy. They want a clean cohort. Once enrolled, the participants provide data, likely through detailed health surveys, physical assessments, and perhaps even biomarker collection, although the public protocol emphasizes the assessment of health impacts for the purpose of information dissemination. The goal here is not just to publish a paper. The goal is what the researchers call disseminating gender-sensitive climate information. This phrase, gender-sensitive, is key. It acknowledges that a generic warning system doesn't work. If you tell the population, it's going to be hot, stay inside, that might work for a man who works in an office. But what about the woman who has to walk to the market, or who cares for children in a home with poor ventilation? What about the woman whose physiological response to heat is different? The study aims to generate the data needed to create customized health warnings and interventions. For example, if the data shows that women in Dakahlya are suffering from specific heat-related urinary tract issues, a common problem in dehydration scenarios, or specific patterns of fatigue, the public health officials can issue targeted advice. They can say, women, during this heat wave, you need to do X, Y, and Z to protect your health. But here is where the story gets bigger. This trial isn't happening in a vacuum. It is part of a massive national effort, the Egyptian National Strategy for Women's Empowerment 2030. Egypt has recognized that you cannot have a functioning economy or a stable society if half your population is being quietly ground down by environmental stress. The 2030 strategy has pillars focused on protection and economic empowerment. This clinical trial feeds directly into that. It provides the evidence base for policy. You cannot protect women if you don't know what is hurting them. Let's pause for a second and think about the implications of this. We are used to clinical trials costing billions of dollars and testing fancy new biotech drugs. But sometimes the most revolutionary science is simply looking at the right thing. For decades, medical research has treated the male body as the default. Women were often excluded from trials because their hormonal cycles were seen as, quote, complicating variables. This study flips that script. It says the hormonal cycle, the social role, the specific biological vulnerability, these are not variables to be ignored. These are the focus.
What happens if the researchers find a strong correlation between heat waves and a specific drop in cognitive function among these university students? That changes how we think about education in a warming world.
What if they find that water scarcity is leading to a rise in subclinical infections that are draining women's energy and productivity? That changes how we prioritize infrastructure projects. This is why I call it the invisible crisis. These health impacts don't look like a sudden heart attack. They look like a slow erosion. A woman who is slightly more tired every day. A student whose grades drop because she cannot concentrate in the heat. A family that falls into poverty because the mother is too chronically ill from environmental stress to work. It's a slow violence, and this trial is trying to make it visible. Now, let's talk about the safety and ethics of this research. You might think it's just a survey, what's the risk? But in a conservative society, asking detailed questions about health, hygiene, and mental state requires immense trust. The researchers have to ensure absolute privacy. They have to navigate cultural sensitivities. The fact that this is being run through universities, Al-Mansoura and Delta University, gives it a layer of legitimacy and safety. The participants are in a protected environment. Informed consent is crucial here. The women need to understand that their data is being used to help them, to help their daughters, to help the future of the region. But there is a challenge. The study excludes those with chronic diseases. This is good science for establishing a baseline, but it also leaves a gap. We know that the most vulnerable people are often those with pre-existing conditions. A diabetic woman in a heat wave is in grave danger. The researchers likely know this, but they have to start somewhere. By understanding the baseline impact on a healthy body, they can then extrapolate the risks for the sick. Let's zoom out to the global picture. Why should you, sitting in your home perhaps thousands of miles away from the Nile Delta, care about this study? Because the Nile Delta is a preview. Climate change is not hitting everywhere at once. It strikes certain places first. The Delta is a low-lying, hot, resource-strained region. It is facing the challenges today that other agricultural hubs will face in 10 or 20 years. The health impacts documented in this study will likely appear in the medical textbooks of the future as the classic signs of climate distress. When we understand how heat affects the menstrual cycle, or how climate stress impacts female mental health in Egypt, we gain knowledge that applies to women in Texas, in Spain, in India, in Australia. Biology is universal, even if the geography is specific. And there is another layer, the empowerment aspect. This trial frames health as a form of power. If a woman is healthy, she can learn. If she can learn, she can work. If she can work, she can lead. Climate change threatens to break this chain at the very first link, health. By securing the health link, the researchers are trying to protect the future leadership of the country. So, what are the potential outcomes? Best case scenario, the study reveals clear, actionable patterns. For instance, they might find that access to specific cooling behaviors or hydration protocols significantly reduces the mental and physical burden. This leads to a public health campaign. Simple, low-cost interventions are rolled out. Gender-sensitive climate information has become a standard part of the weather forecast. Worst-case scenario, the data shows a massive, overwhelming degradation of health that is hard to mitigate. They might find that the heat is causing irreversible stress that simple behavioral changes can't fix. This would be a dark finding, but an honest one. It would signal the need for much more radical adaptation, changes in architecture, changes in working hours, changes in urban planning. Even a neutral result, finding that the impacts are less severe than feared, would be valuable. It would tell us that the human body is more resilient than we thought, at least up to a point. But given the extreme nature of the climate shifts in the Delta, a neutral result is unlikely. But here is the thing that really sticks with me about this trial. It's the shift in perspective. For so long, we have treated the environment as something out there. We measure the carbon in the air, the pH of the ocean. This study turns the lens inward. It measures the environment in here, in our blood, in our stress levels, in our capacity to function. It reminds us that we are not separate from the climate. We are permeable. When the world runs a fever, we run a fever. As this study progresses, it is listed with a completion date in 2025. We will likely see preliminary data starting to shape the conversation in Egypt. We might see new guidelines emerging from the Ministry of Health. We might see the National Strategy for Women's Empowerment updated with a new chapter on climate resilience. It is a slow, quiet scientific endeavor. There are no flashing lights, no dramatic surgeries, just researchers, clipboards, and thousands of women in the Nile Delta answering questions about their lives. But do not mistake this quietness for lack of importance. In the grand scheme of the 21st century, this might be some of the most critical medical research being done. Because it asks the question that will define our century. How do we stay healthy on a changing planet? And more specifically, how do we ensure that the mothers, the sisters, the daughters, the people who often bear the brunt of social and environmental upheaval, are not left behind? So, the next time you hear about a clinical trial, don't just look for the new cancer drug or the high-tech device. Look for studies like this one, studies that are trying to diagnose the health of humanity itself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Did you know that climate change had such specific gendered impacts? Do you think more medical research should focus on the intersection of environment and biology? Let's keep the conversation going, because understanding the problem is the first step towards surviving it. Thank you for watching.